Hey everyone, it's Skiesti. This is a VOD review of a 2.3k SR game. This player felt that their main problems were in their positioning and their decision making. With that, we'll get started with team composition. So your default is going to be pocketing the Ashe and letting your Baptiste handle the tanks while Summer kinda does her own thing. Even right off the bat here, I'd encourage stretching your beams so that you can play safely behind the wall on your left near where the chair is so that you aren't moving in and out of the enemy line of sight. You missed the damage boost on Dynamite to help Roadhog. He has his heal as well as Bap to back him up, so although he takes a lot of damage, it's not enough that you need to leave your Ashe. You and Ashe controlling this high ground is going to be very important. You don't have to play so close to your pocket target. You can play further up the staircase, but maintain LOS if your Ashe moves too far. I understand why you went to help your tanks here, since Bap is not there, but you're not able to keep D.Va in mech. I think Hog would have lived without your healing, and they meet back up with Bap pretty quickly. I still think you'll be most valuable here being with Ashe on the flank, and this also allows you to avoid ending up sort of in the midst of the enemy team and in direct LOS of their Bastion like you did. I would strongly urge you to practice your super jumps more consistently. Right now you should be back on the high ground with Ashe, and you seem to know that too. If you're unable to super jump, you can try walking toward main to get line of sight of her when she peeks the platform and just GA to her that way. You seem a bit lost when Ashe cuts LOS of you. I would walk toward her and meet her at the top of the stairs because she's heading back up, especially since the Junkrat drops. This is something that I kind of noticed throughout the review, but you're really high up in your Valkyrie, so try to play lower or more around cover if you can. As soon as Valk is about to end, you should be looking for Ashe and planning to go to her back on the high ground. She is always going to be who you default to in this. This is really dangerous. People are respawning, so you need to be careful of damage coming from their spawn area. If you were with Ashe earlier, this could have been avoided, but in this case, super jumping to the high ground across from your Ashe and pocketing her from there is much more safe for you and also would have avoided ending up in the midst of the enemy team. You're down a lot, so you can stretch your beam on Zarya and sit behind the second wall rather than being so close to her. It's just safer for you that way. Hugging this wall here is really good for you. You probably should have started doing that earlier as soon as your Ashe takes the window angle. A safer route would be not to drop toward the front, but instead move toward the high ground bridge. Try not to unnecessarily super jump. You can probably just play behind the wall here. If you want to get the ult charge from D.Va, I would try to be a little faster about it before returning to Ashe on the high ground. You should be trying to hug the wall again that you did earlier when Ashe took this position. You get there eventually, but it should probably be your default to be by some kind of cover and not on top of your pocket. When you're pocketing, try to always be looking around and checking flanks rather than staring at your pocket target. Honestly, barely even heard the Junkrat, and when he does appear, you should drop backward inside instead of forward. When you're Valking, again, you don't need to be so close to your team. Utilize the extended beam range of Valk to play in a safer position with a wider view. Right now, it's sometimes hard to even tell what's going on because of how closed off your view is. Once Valkyrie is ending, you should be looking for Ashe again. You have window up and Bap is still alive, so he can easily take care of your tanks. Really pay attention to where you're standing while you're pocketing. Ask yourself, can the enemy team see me? Is there somewhere better that I could be positioning? What cover is around me? There are times when you're behind a wall, but sometimes peeking, which is unnecessarily. So make sure you're properly in cover. And remember to look around as well. A lot of the time you're staring at walls to see your teammate's position or health, but you can take time to check flanks too. This super jump is kind of like incredibly risky. Rather than super jumping closer to the enemy team and into danger, just walk backwards. Just keep moving backward here. You should be behind Bap and Ashe as you're retreating. Once Bap returns from spawn, you can default back to Ashe and not Zarya. You're lucky that you ended up surviving because of Zarya bubble, but try to refrain from being in a position where you're clumped up with the rest of your team. And this is where being on the high ground with Ashe would have been nice, and then you could have gone back to res if it was safe. Valkyrie. 100% you should Valk here. You got the res already, and if you can survive, your team most likely wins this fight. Even though they have ults, you've almost got Bob and EMP, and Bab's coming back with Window, and you've also got spawn advantage here. Definitely Valk here. I assume you're trying to res Bap here, but he's pretty far up. Your D.Va is critical and your team is going to have to regroup properly, so the best thing that you can do is try to help D.Va get out with her mech. Again, too close to your beam target. If you play close to max beam range or a stretcher beam, you end up being much safer, and you also don't have to do unnecessary super jumps just to get distance between you and the enemy. Kind of like we mentioned before, it's really common that when you Valk, you're just way too close to your team and the enemy team. Remember to be checking around. Don't keep your point of view fixed to the person you're healing, because you almost get hooked from the left since you end up not seeing him. Once you notice Cassidy back in the fight, that's where you should start going to help him, and when you make the decision to do so, you end up being a bit too late and end up having to GA across the enemy team to try to get to him. Instead of resing Bap into danger, you should turn a bit to the left to kill your Sigma instead. But because you go for the res, Sigma ends up dying when there's a chance you could have safely helped him. Really watch healing full health targets and beam disconnects. In this last fight, you seem a bit lost, or it's honestly hard to tell what's going on exactly. This is a moment where I'd probably utilize super jump, but you know, pay attention to hog hook of course, so that I could get above the fight and out of the enemy team. You could have also GA to your Sigma when he was using Flux to achieve the same thing. So going on to our attack, it's the same setup as before. You'll be defaulting to Ashe. Watch for your positioning. You can safely position on the high ground with Ashe, just so you aren't in line of sight down main. I would also watch accidentally GAing too far forward. Now that Ashe is gone, you'll be defaulting to damage boosting D.Va, or if Rein is close enough, his swings or fire strikes. If there's a sim turret, especially if you're still waiting on Ashe to come back, you can take a moment to destroy it if it's preventing you from being in the position that you want to take. If Rein dies, and he does, you don't want to be cut off from your exits. Putting yourself in this room makes it hard for you to get away. Positioning up on the high ground would be best here, and watching for when Ashe comes back. Ideally, you'd be on the flank with her as soon as she respawns. D.Va has already lost mech and is deep in the enemy team. You won't be able to help her out here. And rather than going in front of your team, stay back a little bit and damage boost your Ashe and let them take the lead instead. So here your second healer swaps Brig, which is going to change your playstyle a bit. You'll have to keep a closer eye on Reinhardt, and when he isn't taking too much damage, you can still be damage boosting Ashe, but you have to be close enough to Rein that you can react quickly if he is in danger. I think you should have really healed D.Va and helped her retreat. Normally, if Tyre wasn't a threat right now, you'd be healing Rein since he's aggressing. But since Tyre is a threat, the rest of your team is unfortunately dead to it. So as soon as Sim is beaming D.Va and she's critical, you should be helping her, but because you didn't, she ends up being incredibly staggered. Try to be a bit more mindful of who your beam is on. I think it's happened quite a few times, but if no one needs healing or anything, your default will always be to damage boost your primary damage dealer. If someone does need healing, when you're the main healer, you need to watch who you're focusing healing on. You don't need to look at the target you're healing to see their health bar, since it's also in the middle of your screen. You look at the Rein for what I assume is this reason, when you can keep your camera toward the fight and be observing what's going on instead of tunnel visioning your camera on him. This Valk here is at least a bit better since you're playing around the building corner more, but you're not looking around enough. And you would have been able to catch the sim on Ashe and respond quicker to help her if you had been able to see it before. Once the sim is dead and the turns aren't a threat anymore, you'll want to shift focus and help Rein and break with the front line. Watch your target prioritization as you do this. Rein is taking a lot of damage and you get a bit behind on healing. I barely even saw this Junkrat coming. It's also hard to tell if you could have even seen him if you looked to the left and surveyed around more, so yeah. Either way, I probably would have either stayed on that high ground or GA'd forward quicker to this position here instead, so you could see more and be aware of where the enemy might be coming from depending on who is still alive. As much as you can, you want to stay with D.Va here. She's your only tank right now, and you'd ideally want to keep her in mech. But since she does lose mech, damage boosting her with a line of sight for her to shoot to get her mech doesn't do much. Instead, focus attention to damage boosting DPS or helping Rein if he needs it. Watch Jiang too far forward into the enemy team. I don't think that this Valk was really necessary since you're just cleaning up the fight right now, especially since they might have a recontest with TP, and Valk could be pretty useful for that. When your Rein charges off to the left side, you don't have to GA after him. Just let him do his thing and begin defaulting to Soldier. When Soldier takes the first mine damage here, try to swap to healing to prevent his death.
Protect the payload. We still need you.
Good choice.
When you super jump, it's okay to stop on the high ground and meet him there since there's no danger in doing that instead of going around the stairs. You're playing pretty close to Soldier here. When he backs away from the door, there's most likely a reason for it, so you want to be backing up behind him. Because you're running Mercy Brig, you're the main healer right now still, which means that unfortunately you can't sit on the high ground with your Soldier when the fight is going on, and when your front line is in need of healing. This res is really risky since the Junkrat is still a threat to you. You probably could have stayed in the high ground. It's a good place to be swapping between pocketing Soldier and assisting your front line until they move up a bit more. Then you can drop down to stay in beam range. You need to be serving more again. From your point of view, I can really tell where the tire is coming from, and there's a lot of parts where you're looking away from the fight or tunnel visioning on your team's positioning, and you should be trying to look around and be as aware as possible of what both teams are doing. Also, they have Ashe, so you need to be careful of her sight lines when you're in Valk. And be careful of how you're positioning in Valk. You need to be juggling your beams between your D.Va and Rein a little better to make sure that both of them stay healthy enough to live. Try to push damage boost by helping Soldier with Visor or helping D.Va with her mech so that when you res Rein, she has a healthier HP pool and is more likely not to be demeched during your res. It's good to damage boost for mech, but again, she doesn't really have a good sightline, and I'd probably prioritize Soldier trying to get an off angle or your Rein when he's aggressing here. Speaking of, once your Rein goes in and Soldier backs off because he took damage, he can get the health kit over there while you back your Rein up. Following Soldier puts you way behind on healing and makes you take longer to get back to the fight because he does end up taking the health kit anyway. If you're gonna help D.Va out, you need to make sure you're helping her all the way out. She finally gets mech just to get demeched again, which feeds enemy ults and staggers her so much. You either have to let her die before she gets mech or help her out even after she mechs. And because Soldier is aggressing, you can help him push that off angle until your team regroups down main and then meet up with them after. By the time you do go to him, your Rein needs help again main. You should have been with Soldier earlier and then met up with Rein after. You need to be really careful with a res like this since Rein almost dies when you go for it. I get that you're worried about touching, but you have 30 seconds left, so you don't really need to be the one to touch cart. Instead of being above both teams in Valk, play behind the columns so you put yourself in a safer position. Once the fight is won, you should be damage boosting Soldier in the front line just in case anyone is trying to recontest. Alright, so, defending again. Try to play on the left side if possible again. I don't really like the right side as much because eventually you're gonna have to cross that opening between the pillars. Try as much as you can just to really quickly flick damage boost on Dynamite. When you drop here, you should immediately be going to help your team under, and try your best not to let your beam leave Brig. She definitely could have stayed up there, but since she doesn't, you need to help Ryan immediately after instead of getting out. You two definitely would have won that if you stayed, and then you could have rezzed your Brig after.
30 seconds remaining.
Got this far. Let's not screw it up now.
Be careful about going ahead of your team. You super jump to the high ground before your team moves up, which is a direct sightline for the enemy. Try to be helping your Brig and Ryan near the cart instead of going back to D.Va, who is just coming from spawn. It's much more important for you to be backing them up while they're in that fight. When you go for this res, try to make sure you're more behind the corner instead of in front of the enemy. I would be trying to get some kind of positioning on the high ground here so you're not in the middle of the enemy in the team fight. Even just super jumping above them would be okay in a pinch.
I'm taking care of
Alright, attacking again. Out of the gate, remember to initially start with damage boosting Soldier. When he starts to off angle, then join your team since you're still main healing with this composition. Once D.Va comes into line of sight, you can probably be damage boosting her if no one on the enemy team is in range of your Ryan or Brig's melees. It's good not to follow Ryan in since Junkrat gets rezzed and it becomes much more dangerous for you. Probably need to be a bit faster on the healing for your Soldier versus their Junkrat. Something to keep in mind is just to be careful about standing in front of doorways that the enemy team has a sightline on, which, you know, the fire strike here.
30 seconds remaining.
Again, just be careful with G'ing too far in front of your team. Positioning here is pretty dangerous. You're playing on the cart or in the midst of the enemy again. If you're worried about touch, your team has it. You'll want to probably be on the high ground and helping from there as long as beam range permits. Also, the Junkrat before he tires was like 2 pistol shots or something. If you wanted to get sort of spicy, you could have pulled out the pistol for a few seconds and just tried to go for it. When your Soldier pushes up to prevent people from touching, you need to follow behind at a much safer distance rather than right beside him. And that'll be all. I hope this was helpful, and I hope that at least some of this you can maybe carry into your next games. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.
Thank you.